The sound of laughter echoed across the shooting range that morning, but it wasn't the good kind. Sarah Chen stood at the equipment counter, her small frame barely reaching the clerk's shoulder, while three men behind her snickered at her rifle choice. "You sure you can even lift that thing, sweetheart?" one called out. "Maybe try the .22 instead, it's more your size." What they didn't know was that Sarah had been carrying wounded soldiers through Afghan mountains just 2 years earlier. What they couldn't see was the steady heartbeat that had earned her the nickname Ice Queen among Marine snipers. And what they were about to learn was that underestimating someone based on appearance is the fastest way to eat your words. In the next 60 minutes, Sarah would take a shot that would not only silence every critic in that building but also shatter a range record that had stood untouched for 7 years. But this story isn't just about one perfect shot, it's about the journey of a woman who refused to let anyone else define her limits, even when the whole world seemed determined to prove her wrong. Sarah Chen walked into Thunder Ridge shooting range with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, yet everything to defend. The morning sun cast long shadows through the glass doors as she approached the equipment counter, her worn military boots making soft sounds against the concrete floor. She had driven 3 hours from the city to reach this place, drawn by its reputation for hosting some of the most challenging long-range shooting competitions in the state. The clerk, a middle-aged man with grease-stained fingers and skeptical eyes, looked her up and down when she requested their heaviest rifle setup. "Ma'am, that's a .338 Lapua Magnum. It kicks like a mule and weighs 14 pounds. You might want to consider something more manageable." His tone carried the practiced patience of someone who had dealt with countless beginners who bit off more than they could chew. Behind her, 3 men were setting up their own equipment. Marcus Rodriguez, a local police sergeant with 20 years on the force and arms like tree trunks, had been coming to Thunder Ridge every weekend for the past decade. His shooting buddy, Tom Bradley, owned a construction company and had built his reputation at the range through sheer persistence and an expensive collection of custom rifles. The third man, Jake Morrison, was younger but made up for his lack of experience with loud opinions about everything from ammunition to technique. "You sure you can even lift that thing, sweetheart?" Jake called out, his voice carrying across the busy range. "Maybe try the .22 instead, it's more your size." His comment triggered chuckles from his companions, the kind of casual dismissal that Sarah had encountered countless times throughout her military career. Sarah turned slowly, her dark eyes meeting Jake's with a steadiness that made him shift uncomfortably. "I'll manage," she said simply, her voice carrying no anger, no defensiveness, just quiet certainty. She had learned long ago that the best response to doubt was demonstration, not debate. The clerk handed over the rifle with obvious reluctance, along with a box of premium ammunition that cost more than many people spent on groceries in a week. The weapon was indeed heavy, but Sarah's hands found its balance points automatically. She had intimate familiarity with the platform from her 3 tours overseas, where precision shooting had meant the difference between her unit coming home safe or not at all. As she made her way to the firing line, Sarah caught fragments of conversation from the men behind her. $10 says she can't even hit the 200-yard target," Tom whispered to Marcus. "Look at those skinny arms. No way she handles that recoil." Marcus, being more experienced, held his tongue, but his expression suggested he shared his friend's doubts. The range at Thunder Ridge was impressive by any standard. Targets stretched out to 1,200 yards, with clear sightlines across rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and wildflowers. Electronic scoring systems provided instant feedback, while wind flags placed at regular intervals helped shooters read the conditions that could turn a perfect shot into a disappointing miss. Sarah claimed lane 7, methodically setting up her shooting mat and adjusting the rifle's bipod legs. Her movements were economical, practiced, the muscle memory of someone who had performed these same actions under much more stressful conditions. She checked the scope settings, noting the environmental factors that would affect her shots. Temperature was climbing towards 75 degrees, humidity was low, and a gentle crosswind was moving the flags at about 5 miles per hour. The range safety officer, a retired Army sergeant named Bill Hendricks, approached to check her setup. His initial skepticism melted into professional interest as he watched her handle the rifle. "You've done this before," he observed, noting how she checked the bolt action and verified the rifle's zero with the confidence of an experienced marksman. A few times, Sarah replied, adjusting her shooting position with small, precise movements. She had logged over 10,000 rounds through similar rifles during her Marine Corps service, but saw no need to elaborate. Her record would speak for itself soon enough. From the neighboring lanes, she could hear Jake providing running commentary to anyone within earshot. "Watch this," he announced loudly, settling behind his own rifle. "I'll show you how it's done. Been shooting since I was 12, and my dad taught me everything about reading wind and distance." Jake's first shot at the 300-yard target scored a respectable 8 out of 10, earning approving nods from his friends. Tom followed with a 9, while Marcus put 3 consecutive shots into the 10 ring with the steady precision of someone who took his shooting seriously. The electronic scoring system's beeps and announcements created a rhythm that was familiar and comfortable to everyone present. Sarah loaded her first round, feeling the smooth action of the bolt as it chambered the cartridge. The weight of expectation hung in the air around her, but it was nothing compared to the pressure she had experienced in Afghanistan, where missing meant that good people died. She settled into her shooting position, controlling her breathing as she aligned the scope's crosshairs with the distant target. Her first shot, aimed at the 300-yard target, struck dead center with a satisfying ping that carried across the range. The electronic display flashed a perfect 10, but Sarah's expression remained neutral. This was just the beginning, a way to verify her zero and get a feel for the rifle's particular characteristics. "Lucky shot," Jake muttered, though his tone had lost some of its earlier confidence. He fired again, this time scoring a 7 as the wind caught his bullet and pushed it slightly off target. Sarah continued her systematic approach, firing one shot every 30 seconds as she gathered data about how this particular rifle performed. Each round struck within the 10 ring, creating a tight cluster that drew increasingly interested looks from other shooters on the line. The casual conversations that had filled the air began to quiet as people noticed the consistent precision coming from lane 7. By the time she had fired 10 rounds, a small crowd had gathered behind the firing line to watch. Range regulars who had seen thousands of shooters over the years recognized something special when they saw it. Sarah's shooting position was textbook perfect, her follow-through was flawless, and her shot-to-shot consistency was the kind that usually required years of dedicated practice to achieve. "Okay, that's some good shooting," Marcus admitted grudgingly, lowering his binoculars after watching Sarah's latest group. "But 300 yards isn't exactly long range. Let's see how she does when things get interesting." Jake, stung by the implicit criticism of his earlier dismissal, doubled down on his skepticism. Anyone can hit a big target at 300. Real shooting starts at 600 yards and beyond. That's where the men get separated from the boys. He paused, then added with deliberate provocation, or in this case, where we find out if beginner's luck can last. Sarah heard the comment but didn't respond. Instead, she made a note in her shooting log about the rifle's point of impact at 300 yards, then began calculating the adjustments needed for longer distances. The mathematics of long-range shooting were complex, involving variables like bullet drop, wind deflection, air density, and the Coriolis effect. But these calculations had become second nature to her during countless hours of training and real-world application. The range officer announced a ceasefire for target changes, and shooters moved downrange to inspect their results and post fresh targets at various distances. Sarah folded her shooting mat and walked the 300 yards to her target, drawing curious glances from other competitors as they saw the tight cluster of holes within the bullseye. "That's some fine shooting, young lady," said an elderly man who had been watching from the spectator area. "You mind me asking where you learned to shoot like that?" His question was genuine, carrying none of the condescension that had marked her earlier interactions. "Here and there," Sarah replied with a small smile, carefully removing her target and folding it for her records. She had learned to be circumspect about her military service, particularly in civilian settings where people sometimes had complicated feelings about America's overseas conflicts. As they walked back to the firing line, Jake tried to salvage his credibility with louder proclamations about the challenges of shooting at extended ranges. "See, the thing about long-distance shooting is that it's not just about having steady hands. You need to understand ballistics, atmospheric conditions, and target movement. It takes years to develop those skills properly. Tom nodded along, adding his own observations about the difficulties they would face at longer ranges. The 600-yard line is where most people hit their wall. The targets look tiny through the scope, and every little mistake gets magnified. Wind reading becomes critical, and you can't just rely on luck anymore. Sarah listened to their analysis as she prepared for the next phase of her shooting session. Everything they said was technically correct, but they were treating her like a student who needed instruction rather than someone who might already possess the knowledge they were sharing. She had experienced similar assumptions throughout her military career, where her competence was constantly questioned until proven beyond any reasonable doubt. The afternoon sun was climbing higher, creating heat shimmer that would make target identification more challenging at extreme distances. Sarah factored these conditions into her mental calculations as she prepared to move to the 600-yard line. The men around her were making similar preparations, checking their scopes and discussing strategy with the confidence of people who believed they were about to witness the limits of amateur ability. What none of them knew was that Sarah Chen had earned her reputation the hard way, in places where precision shooting was a matter of life and death rather than weekend recreation. Her steady hands had guided bullets through narrow windows in enemy strongholds, and her patient calculations had saved American lives on multiple occasions. The range at Thunder Ridge, challenging as it might be for civilian shooters, was a comfortable environment compared to the mountain peaks of Afghanistan where she had honed her skills under enemy fire. As she prepared for her first shot at 600 yards, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had served her well throughout her military career. The doubters behind her would have their answer soon enough, but that outcome had never really been in question. The only variable was how dramatically she would exceed their expectations, and whether they would have the grace to acknowledge their mistake when the shooting was done. The 600-yard line at Thunder Ridge represented a significant step up in difficulty. The targets, while larger than those at 300 yards, appeared as small black circles through even the most powerful scopes. Heat waves rising from the sun-baked earth created a shimmering effect that made precise aim challenging, while the increased distance meant that minor errors in technique would be magnified dramatically. Sarah settled into her new position with the same methodical approach that had characterized her shooting all morning. She adjusted her scope for the increased distance, factoring in the bullet drop that would occur over the longer flight path. The .338 Lapua Magnum cartridge was designed for exactly this type of shooting, but it still required careful calculation to account for the physics involved. Behind her, Jake was providing another running commentary for his friends. "This is where reality sets in," he announced confidently. 600 yards is serious business. You can't just point and shoot anymore. Every little movement gets amplified, and the wind becomes a major factor. He gestured toward the wind flags, which were showing a steady breeze from the left that would push bullets off course if not properly compensated for. Marcus was taking his own preparations seriously, consulting a ballistic chart he had developed for his custom rifle. His years of experience had taught him respect for the challenges of long-range shooting, and he approached each shot with careful deliberation. Tom was adjusting his scope settings, making small corrections based on his observations of the environmental conditions. The range safety officer made his standard announcement about the importance of following proper procedures at extended distances. "Remember, folks, what you do at 600 yards affects everyone downrange. Take your time, make sure of your targets, and don't rush your shots. Safety is our top priority." Sarah loaded her first round for the 600-yard target, feeling the familiar weight of the cartridge as it seated properly in the chamber. Through her scope, the distant target looked crisp and clear despite the heat shimmer. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm she had learned during sniper training, where each shot was preceded by the same careful sequence of mental and physical preparation. The crosshairs settled onto the center of the target as Sarah controlled her natural respiratory pause. Her finger found the trigger's break point, applying steady pressure until the rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. The recoil pushed back against her shoulder with substantial force, but her position absorbed it smoothly without disturbing her sight picture. Downrange, the electronic scoring system registered another perfect 10. The bullet had struck within an inch of the bullseye center, demonstrating the kind of precision that most recreational shooters achieved only occasionally and with considerable luck. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom muttered, lowering his binoculars with a look of genuine surprise. That's some serious shooting right there." His tone had lost the casual dismissiveness that had characterized his earlier comments, replaced by the grudging respect of one marksman for another. Jake, however, was not ready to concede anything. "One shot doesn't make a shooter," he declared. "Consistency is what matters. Let's see if she can do it again." His own first attempt at 600 yards had scored a respectable 8, but his follow-up shot had drifted into the 7 ring when he failed to properly account for the crosswind. Sarah continued her systematic approach, firing one shot every minute as she gathered data about the rifle's performance at this new distance. Each round struck within the 10 ring, creating a tight group that would have been impressive for any shooter regardless of their experience level. Her shooting log filled with careful notations about wind speed, temperature changes, and minor adjustments to her point of aim. By her 5th shot, word was spreading throughout the range about the exceptional shooting coming from lane 7. Experienced marksmen who had been focusing on their own targets began drifting over to observe the young woman who was making 600-yard precision look effortless. The casual atmosphere that typically characterized weekend shooting sessions was giving way to the focused attention that accompanied truly exceptional performance. "You know what," said Bill Hendricks, the range safety officer, approaching Sarah during a ceasefire period, "I've been running this range for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of people I've seen shoot like that at 600 yards. You mind me asking what your background is?" Sarah looked up from her shooting log, where she had been recording wind speeds and atmospheric pressure readings. "Military," she said simply, offering no additional details about her service record or the circumstances that had led to her current level of skill. Bill nodded with understanding. "Figured as much. We get a lot of veterans out here, but most of them need some time to shake off the rust. You're shooting like you never left the service." He gestured toward the target display, where Sarah's group was clearly visible as a tight cluster within the bull's eye. Marcus had been watching Sarah's technique between his own shots, and his professional interest was growing with each round she fired. As a police sergeant with extensive tactical training, he recognized the signs of someone who had received world-class instruction and had the experience to apply it effectively. "That's some beautiful shooting," he told her honestly. "Mind if I ask what unit you served with?" "Marines," Sarah replied, making a small adjustment to her scope based on a slight shift in wind direction. "Scout snipers." She offered the information matter-of-factly, without pride or false modesty, as simply a relevant detail that explained her current performance. The revelation sent a ripple of recognition through the small crowd that had gathered. Marine Scout snipers represented the elite of American military marksmanship, warriors who underwent some of the most rigorous training available anywhere in the world. Their reputation for precision shooting was legendary, built through decades of proven performance in the most challenging conditions imaginable. Jake's face flushed as the implications became clear. He had been lecturing a Marine Scout sniper about the basics of long-range shooting, demonstrating a level of presumption that made his earlier comments seem foolish in retrospect. "Well, hell," he said awkwardly, "I guess that explains a few things." Tom clapped him on the shoulder with a mixture of sympathy and amusement. "Son, I think you just learned an important lesson about making assumptions. This lady has probably forgotten more about shooting than you or I will ever know." His tone was good-natured, but the message was clear. Sarah appreciated their change in attitude, but she was more interested in continuing her shooting session than in dwelling on past misunderstandings. The afternoon sun was creating more challenging conditions as heat waves increased and the wind patterns became more variable. These factors would make shooting at even longer distances significantly more difficult. "There's a 1,000-yard range here, isn't there?" she asked Bill Hendricks during the next ceasefire period. "I was hoping to test this rifle at some serious distance." Bill's eyebrows rose with interest. The 1,000-yard line at Thunder Ridge was reserved for the most experienced shooters, requiring not only exceptional skill but also careful safety protocols due to the extended bullet flight time and the precision required for safe shooting. "There sure is," he confirmed. "But I have to warn you, it's a whole different game out there. The current record for that distance was set 7 years ago by a former Army Special Forces soldier, and nobody's come close to matching it since then." "But what's the record?" Sarah asked, her interest clearly piqued by the challenge. 10 shots in a 4.2-inch group, Bill replied. On a day with perfect conditions and absolutely no wind. The shooter was a decorated veteran with over 20 years of military service, and he was using a custom rifle that cost more than most people's cars. He gestured toward the distant target line, barely visible through the afternoon heat shimmer. Most people are happy just to hit the target at that distance, much less group their shots tightly. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, already beginning the mental calculations required for shooting at such extreme distance. The .338 Lapua Magnum cartridge was certainly capable of accurate performance at 1,000 yards, but the environmental factors would be challenging. Heat shimmer would distort her view of the target, while even slight wind variations could push bullets significantly off course during their extended flight time. I'd like to give it a try, she said simply, beginning to gather her equipment for the move to the extreme distance line. Marcus, who had been listening to the conversation, shook his head with a mixture of admiration and concern. Ma'am, with all due respect for your obvious skill, 1,000 yards is incredibly challenging even for someone with your background. The conditions today aren't ideal, and that record was set by someone with decades of experience. Every record was set by someone until someone else came along, Sarah replied with a slight smile. Besides, I didn't come here to play it safe. I came here to see what this rifle could do at distance. Tom Bradley, who had been silent during the exchange, spoke up with genuine curiosity. You really think you can challenge a 7-year-old record on your first visit to this range? That's a pretty bold claim, even for someone with your credentials. Sarah finished packing her equipment and stood to move toward the 1,000-yard line. I guess we'll find out, she said. But I didn't drive 3 hours to shoot at easy distances. If you're going to test yourself, you might as well test yourself properly. As she walked toward the extreme distance firing line, a growing crowd followed her. Word had spread throughout Thunder Ridge about the Marine veteran who was shooting with exceptional precision, and now the possibility of a new range record had drawn the attention of every serious marksman present. The casual weekend atmosphere had transformed into something approaching a formal competition, with spectators gathering to witness what might become a historic shooting performance. The 1,000-yard line was positioned at the far end of the range complex, with clear sight lines across rolling terrain that stretched toward distant hills. The targets appeared as tiny specks even through high-powered spotting scopes, requiring exceptional visual acuity and technical skill to engage effectively. Environmental factors that were minor annoyances at shorter distances became major challenges at this extreme range. Sarah set up her shooting position with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized her performance throughout the day. The bipod legs were adjusted for perfect stability, her shooting mat was positioned to provide maximum comfort during extended shooting, and her scope settings were calculated precisely for the increased distance and current atmospheric conditions. Behind her, the crowd had grown to include virtually every shooter present at Thunder Ridge that afternoon. Range regulars who had witnessed the previous record-setting performance were describing the difficulty of the challenge to newcomers, while experienced marksmen discussed the technical factors that would influence Sarah's attempt. The stage was set for a shooting performance that would either confirm Sarah's exceptional abilities or demonstrate the humbling reality of extreme long-range marksmanship. Either way, everyone present understood they were about to witness something memorable, a test of skill that would separate genuine expertise from merely competent shooting. The 1,000-yard firing line at Thunder Ridge felt different from the shorter distances. The targets appeared as tiny black dots against the distant hillside, barely visible even through powerful optics. The afternoon heat had intensified the mirage effect, creating waves of distortion that made precise aiming extremely challenging. Wind flags positioned at various intervals showed subtle variations in air movement that would affect bullet trajectory during the nearly 2-second flight time to target. Sarah methodically prepared her shooting position, understanding that every detail mattered at this distance. Her shooting mat was positioned to provide optimal support, and she made minute adjustments to her rifle's bipod to ensure perfect stability. The crowd behind her had grown to include nearly every person at the range that afternoon, creating an atmosphere of anticipation that was unusual for what had started as a casual weekend shooting session. Bill Hendricks, the range safety officer, approached with a measuring device and official scoring sheets. If you're serious about challenging the record, we need to do this properly, he explained. Official measurements, witnessed shots, and documented conditions. He gestured toward an elderly man with a weathered face and keen eyes. "That's Bob Mitchell, the current record holder. He insisted on being here to verify any attempt at his record." Bob stepped forward with a slight smile and extended his hand. "Heard you might be taking a run at my little achievement," he said. "Can't say I'm not curious to see what a Marine Scout sniper can do with proper equipment." His tone carried no defensiveness, only genuine interest in witnessing exceptional marksmanship. "It's an honor to meet you," Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I've heard your record is something special. 4.2 inches at 1,000 yards is incredible shooting under any circumstances." "Well, I had perfect conditions that day," Bob admitted. "No wind, cool temperature, and I was shooting a rifle that had been custom built specifically for that distance. Today's conditions are more challenging, with this heat shimmer and the variable wind patterns." He studied the distant targets through his own spotting scope. "But, if anyone can do it, I suspect it might be someone with your background." Sarah began her final preparations, checking her scope settings one more time and consulting her shooting data from the shorter distances. The ballistic calculations for 1,000 yards were complex, requiring precise adjustments for bullet drop, wind deflection, air density, and even the rotation of the Earth. Every variable had to be accounted for if she hoped to achieve the precision necessary to challenge Bob's record. Marcus had set up his own spotting scope to observe Sarah's shots, while Tom and Jake positioned themselves where they could see both the firing line and the distant targets. The transformation in their attitudes was complete. Jake, who had begun the day mocking Sarah's capabilities, was now one of her most interested observers, eager to witness shooting that might rewrite the range's record books. "Wind's tricky today," observed an experienced shooter who had introduced himself as Dave Peterson. "We've got that crosswind from the left, but it's gusty. Probably varying between 8 and 12 miles per hour, which means you'll need to hold off differently for each shot." He had been shooting at Thunder Ridge for over a decade and understood how local conditions affected bullet performance. Sarah nodded, already tracking the wind flag movements and timing the gusts. In Afghanistan, she had learned to read wind patterns across mountain valleys where air currents could change dramatically within seconds. The conditions at Thunder Ridge were challenging but predictable compared to some of the shots she had made during combat deployments. Loading her first cartridge for the 1,000-yard attempt, Sarah settled into her shooting position and began the breathing routine that had become second nature during her military service. Through her scope, the distant target was barely visible through the heat waves, requiring intense concentration to maintain a steady sight picture. The crosshairs wavered slightly as thermal currents distorted her view, adding another layer of difficulty to an already challenging shot. Her first shot broke with the sharp crack that had become familiar throughout the afternoon. The bullet's flight time to the 1,000-yard target was nearly 2 seconds, during which atmospheric conditions could affect its trajectory in numerous ways. When the electronic scoring system finally registered the hit, announcing a 10 with coordinates indicating the bullet had struck within 2 inches of the target center, the crowd erupted in appreciative murmurs. "Holy hell," Jake whispered, staring through his binoculars at the distant target. That shot would have been the center of Bob's record group right there. His earlier skepticism had been completely replaced by genuine awe at Sarah's demonstrated capabilities. Bob Mitchell was studying the shot through his own optics, nodding with professional appreciation. "That's some beautiful shooting," he called out. "But, the real challenge is consistency. One good shot is impressive, but 10 shots in a tight group is what separates the exceptional from the merely lucky." Sarah understood the truth of his observation. The current record required not just one perfect shot, but 10 consecutive shots that grouped within a circle smaller than a baseball at 1,000 yards. Environmental conditions would change during the shooting sequence, requiring constant adjustment and adaptation. Her second shot struck slightly higher than the first, still well within the 10 ring but indicating that she needed to account for changing atmospheric pressure as the afternoon progressed. The third shot was her best yet, striking within an inch of her first round and demonstrating the kind of consistency that had made her reputation during military service. By now, the crowd had grown silent except for occasional technical discussions about wind conditions and ballistic performance. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something exceptional. "She's building a hell of a group," Tom observed quietly, consulting the spotting scope that Marcus had shared with him. If she can maintain this level of precision, Bob's record is definitely in jeopardy. His tone carried the respect of someone who had struggled for years to achieve even basic competency at long range, watching Sarah make it appear effortless. Shot number 4 presented new challenges as the wind shifted direction, requiring Sarah to adjust her point of aim to compensate for the changing conditions. She took extra time with this round, waiting for the wind flags to settle into a pattern she could predict. When the shot broke, it struck fractionally to the left of her growing group, but still within the tight cluster she was building. The 5th shot was where the pressure truly began. Bob's record required an average group size that left no room for significant errors, meaning that every remaining round had to be placed with surgical precision. Sarah was aware of the mathematics involved but refused to let the calculations distract her from the fundamental requirements of each individual shot. Winds picked up a bit, Dave Peterson observed, studying the flags through his binoculars. She's going to need to adjust her hold off for these next few rounds. The afternoon thermal activity was creating more variable conditions, making precise wind reading increasingly difficult. Sarah's 6th shot struck slightly right of her group center, still within the overall pattern but indicating that atmospheric conditions were becoming more challenging as the afternoon progressed. She made a small scope adjustment and settled in for the 7th round, understanding that the remaining shots would determine whether her attempt would fall short or establish a new standard for precision shooting at Thunder Ridge. The 7th and 8th shots struck within half an inch of each other, demonstrating the kind of shot-to-shot consistency that defined world-class marksmanship. The crowd had become completely silent, understanding that they were witnessing a potential record-setting performance. Even experienced shooters who had seen exceptional marksmanship before recognized that Sarah's group was approaching the dimensions necessary to challenge Bob's 7-year-old achievement. 2 more shots, Bob called out, his voice carrying both encouragement and professional interest. If you can maintain that precision, you're going to have yourself a new record. He had spent the entire sequence calling wind conditions and offering technical observations, demonstrating the sportsmanlike attitude that characterized the best competitive shooters. Sarah's 9th shot was perhaps her most challenging, fired during a period when the wind flags were showing conflicting information about air movement at different distances. She held her breath during the bullet's flight time, knowing that this round would largely determine whether her final shot would be for a record or simply for a respectable group. When the scoring system announced another 10, striking within the existing group pattern, she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The final shot carried the weight of the entire afternoon's performance. Sarah took extra time with her preparation, verifying her scope settings and carefully reading the wind conditions one last time. The crowd behind her was completely silent, understanding that they were about to witness either a triumphant conclusion or a heartbreaking near miss. Through her scope, the target appeared sharp and clear despite the heat shimmer. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that had served her throughout 3 combat deployments, and her finger found the trigger's familiar breakpoint. The rifle fired with the same sharp crack that had marked each of her previous shots, and the bullet began its 2-second journey toward a target that appeared no larger than a postage stamp at 1,000 yards. When the electronic scoring system finally announced the result, the silence was broken by spontaneous applause from the gathered crowd. The final shot had struck within the group pattern, creating a 10-shot cluster that measured 3.8 inches from edge to edge. Sarah had not only broken Bob Mitchell's record but had shattered it by nearly half an inch, achieving a level of precision that redefined what was possible at Thunder Ridge shooting range. Bob Mitchell was the first to reach her, his hand extended in congratulation. "Outstanding shooting," he said with genuine warmth. "That's the kind of performance that makes the rest of us want to practice more." His graciousness in defeat exemplified the best traditions of competitive marksmanship. Marcus, Tom, and even Jake gathered around to offer their congratulations, their earlier skepticism completely forgotten in the face of Sarah's demonstrated excellence. "I owe you an apology," Jake said honestly. "I made assumptions based on appearances, and I was completely wrong. That was some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed." Bill Hendricks approached with the official measurement and scoring documentation. "Well, we'll need to make this official, but I can tell you right now that you've got yourself a new range record. 3.8 inches at 1,000 yards, witnessed and verified." He shook his head in amazement. I've been running this range for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that performance." As the crowd began to disperse and the afternoon shooting session wound down, Sarah packed her equipment with the same methodical care that had characterized her entire day. The drive home would give her time to reflect on an afternoon that had begun with casual dismissal and ended with grudging respect, proving once again that capability cannot be determined by appearance alone. The new record plaque would eventually be mounted near the 1,000-yard line, bearing Sarah Chen's name and the date of her exceptional performance. But the real achievement was not the record itself, but the lesson it provided about the danger of underestimating people based on preconceptions and the value of letting performance speak louder than assumptions. Years later, when shooters at Thunder Ridge discussed the greatest performances they had witnessed, Sarah's afternoon would be remembered not just for the record she set, but for the quiet dignity with which she had faced down doubt and the exceptional skill that had silenced every critic who had questioned her abilities. The Marine Scout sniper who had been mocked for her weapon choice had responded in the most definitive way possible, with precision that rewrote the standards of excellence at one of the region's most challenging shooting ranges.